Raptors fans need this. They're craving that full circle moment of Bruno Caboclo returning to the Toronto Raptors and fulfilling that potential, fulfilling that promise made in that draft many years ago. And after a strong Olympic performance, a lot of Raptors fans are calling for his return. But there are a few factors that really have to come into play in regards to a Bruno Caboclo return. So there's lots of details, lots of speculation, and lots of interest in terms of Raptors fans hoping for a reunion regarding Bruno Caboclo. So we're going to dive into all the details, what Bruno's actually been doing beyond the Olympics in recent years, and whether or not, despite the heart saying yes, logically it makes sense for the Toronto Raptors to go after their former wing, their former prospect, their former dude, Bruno Caboclo. But before we dive into that, folks, again, if you're part of the over 50% that hasn't hit the subscribe button just yet, make sure you hit that sub button so you don't miss a single thing regarding the Toronto Raptors to close out this offseason, enter into an exciting year of Toronto Raptors basketball. But folks, if anyone's been on Twitter, anyone's been watching the Olympics, and you're a fan of the Toronto Raptors, you've probably seen some of your peers come out and say, hey, Bruno Caboclo is that man. He's the guy that needs to sort of return to the Toronto Raptors because, frankly, he's put up some solid numbers out there in Olympic basketball. Started off the tournament not too great, 0-point performance against France. Again, Germany, not too hot either, but against Japan as well as against the USA. And obviously, Bruno Caboclo playing for Brazil, if you're not familiar. He had some dominant performances. Had a 30-piece against the gold medal winning United States Olympic squad, was knocking down threes, matching up against Kevin Durant, was looking like the guy, the Brazilian KD that a lot of people were hoping he'd develop into as a Toronto Raptor. But against Japan as well, just looked very mature. He's much bigger. He's much stronger in terms of his size and strength relative to where he was, when he was with the Toronto Raptors. Not the greatest sort of pictures for this here, but you can definitely see the size and strength has improved for Bruno Caboclo. But basically, those two 30-point performances were the worst thing for the Toronto Raptors Bruno Caboclo hive because, frankly, that had people excited. He looked like that long, wiry frame in terms of a dude that can space the floor, can block shots, can play defense, and do a lot of things out there on the court. So basically, when people saw that, fans of this team essentially said, we have a bit of a hole now at the power forward position. Losing Pascal, Siakam, OG, these types of guys. Scottie more naturally 3, I guess, can play the 4 a little bit, but we're not sure if Chris Boucher is going to be there. Sasha Vezenkov isn't on this team anymore, so he was cut, and there's an open roster spot. Bruno Fernando was recently signed. The Bruno that a lot of people, I think, the Raptors were sort of signing, when they initially saw that Woj tweet of a Bruno coming to the Toronto Raptors. But Bruno Fernando does play the 4, but doesn't have that 3-point floor spacing and that sort of potential in the sense that Bruno Caboclo could definitely have for this team, in terms of rawness and things like that. Now, Bruno Caboclo is by no means a young prospect anymore. He's had some development. He's played years overseas. So what has he actually been doing? Because, again, a 4-game sample size where only 2 real games actually were solid, isn't enough to really turn heads. I feel like this is one of the main factors that people are overlooking regarding a Bruno Caboclo return, despite how desperately we want this man to be back on the Toronto Raptors and fulfill that story. But basically, looking at his last years, following his NBA stints, he's had not the strongest of performances. In Sao Paulo FC, so playing in Brazil, did put up ridiculous stats. 25 points per game, 11 rebounds a night, shooting 55% from the 3-point line. You don't see the top stats. He's played on so many different teams. Wouldn't be able to read it if we had it all sort of listed here. But basically, beyond that, he started to go back into incrementally better and better leagues. And for Mexico City, averaged 15 points per game, 6 boards. Again, solid numbers there in 16 games for Mexico City in 2022-2023. And over there in Ratio fam, I can't even read that there, but averaged 15 points, 7 boards out there over in Europe. And then finally, in the 2023-2024 season, essentially for a Baltic team, our team in the Balkans, Bruno Caboclo did not put up the most solid of stats. Again, 20 games played, but only 8 points, 4 rebounds, and did shoot 50% from the 3-point line, so was more of a role player, more of a utility player. That, again, that's probably certainly the role. If he were to come back into the NBA, that's a position he'd play. And then obviously people are more familiar with his NBA career, what he was able to do. Didn't really find his footing at any real team, any real stint over the course of his NBA career. Got that contract with the Rockets a few seasons ago, but hasn't really played in the NBA since the 2020-2021 season. So Bruno has been out of the NBA. He's had sort of an up and down, not overwhelming performances overseas and in South America. I guess he did look really good in Brazil, playing South America, but overseas the Balkans was more of a role player, a role piece. So again, that's one thing that is a little bit, if you're coming over, you kind of want someone to be a little bit more dominant, but you also look at that as the fact, Bruno's kind of slid into his roles, more of a 3-and-D guy, not trying to do too much, not trying to overtake, and could be that type of dude for the Toronto Raptors. So again, he has the sort of size, wingspan, the length, and things like that, which is solid. The intangibles, the 3-point shooting, it's all there. But it hasn't put together to be like the Brazilian KD, except, in random games against the United States. He can go off. There's certainly games where we see Bruno Caboclo just look absolutely dominant, but it hasn't really been that consistent in terms of 30 pieces. So that's one factor to keep in mind, despite us wanting to have the story come full circle. He's not consistently putting up 30 pieces against the LeBron James and Kevin Durant's of the world. But there's other factors that have come into play. And Masai Ujiri said midway through this year, which got the Bruno hype rocking and rolling, after all the trades happened, Bruno Caboclo got brought up. And as Blake Murphy points out, Bruno's my guy, man. That's what Masai Ujiri ended up saying, regarding not him coming back or any stretch of the imagination, but there's still that relationship there. Masai Ujiri still thinks positively, but given the fact that he didn't put up overwhelming stats during his, club career overseas and a little bit in South America when he was playing in these different places, Mexico City, Brazil, it might be tough to really sell on bringing back Bruno Caboclo, especially where there are other options the Toronto Raptors are currently dealing with. Now, this is some of the main discussion that we've had in recent weeks, so subscribe to Raptors Digest if you want to keep up to date on all the latest moves at the end of the Toronto Raptors bench. But basically, Bruno Caboclo would, if he was brought in, to a training camp deal, because I think that's where all these guys are at, he'd be competing with, firstly, a guy already brought up in the studio, Bruno Fernando, who Darko Rajaković recently came out and gave some very, very high praise for. Apparently, they've been looking at Bruno Fernando for a long time and are excited to have him coming into training camp and see what he's able to do, have him on the roster. But we also have the other player that I think before the Bruno hype got really into play, people were more excited about, and Christian Koloko, who is back playing 5-on-5. There was a leaked scrim of him playing a pro 5-on-5 scrim with guys like DeLon Wright, with guys like KCP. I think Jordan Clarkson was there. There were a lot of players out there in this scrim, and Christian Koloko was putting up some buckets, putting up some points. It's a little screenshot of, horribly pixelated sort of picture of Christian Koloko posted up. But essentially, as I've kind of discussed, Bruno Fernando is the guy that's like the safe pick to probably be the 15th man on the roster. Christian Koloko hasn't officially been cleared to play. He hasn't officially been able to return to action. So basically, we're waiting to hear whether or not he's going to be cleared. And I'd imagine once he's cleared, given you can see me dive more into detail on this in previous videos, but he's been around the team. Masai Ujiri's kept tabs on him. Christian Koloko's agent has admitted the Toronto Raptors have been in constant communication with Christian Koloko. Koloko will be brought back on one of those training camp prove-it deals, and then we'll see if he ends up winning out that roster spot, because it's not like Christian Koloko is Michael Jordan or something, any stretch of the imagination. Christian Koloko is definitely a really strong prospect, still pretty young, still developing and things, so definitely a guy that can be an awesome piece, but it's not like he should guaranteed be handed the roster spot or anything like that. So he'd come into training camp and then fight for that roster spot, likely get it just given his youth and the development he did show early on his Toronto Raptors career, and then see where it goes from there. So Bruno Caboclo, if brought in, would have to compete with those types of players. Bruno Fernando is still probably the favorite for this team in terms of the way, especially Darko was really gassing up and hyping him up in terms of a player. Atlanta Hawks fans absolutely loved him as a personality in the locker room and stuff, so that's all positives. But let me know what you guys think after looking at the stats, after looking at that. Even though the story is something we need, inject it into my veins. Do you think Bruno Caboclo will end up coming back to the Toronto Raptors? Do you want to see it happen? Let me know in the comment section down below. But you guys best like the star, subscribe to the channel if you guys haven't already. I'm signing out. Cheers.